Welcome to Washington Policy on the Go. My name is David Bose. I'm the Communications Director for Washington Policy Center. And this show comes to you every week during the legislative session. Every Tuesday, we talk with our Senator directors, and on rare occasions, we talk to special guests about what is happening in the legislative session, what's happening in Olympia, how state policy impacts you, and what to expect in the future if certain bills pass. And we also alert you to things that you need to know about so you can act. If you have a passion and understand the impact it might have on your wallet, on your property, on your child's education, we're giving you the information that you need in order to be an active and active participant in government rather than a passive watcher of government. And we thank each of you for coming. I want to start today by thanking all of you who signed our petition to Governor Ferguson. We're still collecting signatures, but we've been all over social media. It's been spread widely by many, many, many of you who have shared that petition with friends and family members, and it has gotten all kinds of buzz. We have tens of thousands of signatures now, over 25,000 signatures to date, so it's been fantastic. And we'll have some more signatures coming up. We'll be delivering those to the governor's office this week. And so I just want to thank everybody for participating in that. We'll send out an update on the final numbers to everyone who signed that petition, as well as some key WPC materials about the end of the legislative session. So that's just been, a great moment. Speaking of great moments, we have Mark Harmsworth, our Center for Small Business Director, with us, who has legislative experience of his own. So when he's watching the legislative session, he has an insider's point of view. And one of the interesting things that's happened in the last 24 hours has been, Governor Ferguson coming out again and a major tax seemingly being off the table. I say seemingly because it's complicated, but we're also, even though we're coming up toward the end of the legislative session this Sunday, April 27th, there's so much left undone and so many things moving about. We could easily see a special session happen, and then you start all over. Everything could be back on the table, and you just don't know. But Mark, why don't you describe what we've learned in the past 24 hours?
Well, the specific tax legislation that the governor has come out against, and the caucuses apparently have put this down, is the property tax increase legislation, which was to remove the 1% cap. And this is actually the second large piece of tax legislation the governor has come out against. The first was the wealth tax, which was proposed much earlier in session. He put that down. The legislature put that down just a couple of weeks ago now. But this is significant. I mean, the property tax increase could have gone up as high as 3%, 4%, even 5%, depending on how the calculations were done with CPI and whatnot. So this is good for everybody. We won't be paying as much property taxes. And I think what it's doing is forcing the majority party to sit down and start actually looking at the budget and deciding priority-wise what's important and what's not important. Because there's been proposals that have come out from the Republicans that have said we can do this without a massive tax increase. We can do this, in fact, with no tax increases, and we can just run with the budget we had before. But instead, the proposals have ranged, as you've seen, from 8 to 12 to 15 to even higher billion-dollar increases to the budget. And this is because over the last few years, the legislature's been using one-time COVID dollars to basically start perpetual programs, and now they're short on cash. So it's good to see this is happening. I think what we're also about to see this week, and you mentioned special session, and I put good money on there being a special session at this point, just because we're on Tuesday right now, and the session finishes up here in the next few days and the weekend here, and you've got to get huge budgets through this process. So through committee hearings, you've got to get it through Ways and Means, you've got to get through rules, you've got to get to the floor, then you've got to get it to the other house, and I mean it's a huge deal to get this thing through the process. I don't think they're going to do it because these two proposals made up a significant amount of the revenue that was expected in the budget concept. So the proposals they put forward, I always put the taxes forward first. I don't know why they do that, but they always do that. So they assumed all these taxes were there. So what's happening right now, I suspect, is there's a whole bunch of very upset legislators that have just had their favorite boondoggle programs put on the table for cuts, and they're now trying to figure out how to make this work. So that negotiation is going to be long, and it's going to be very difficult for the majority party.
And when you say cuts, to be clear, frequently a cut in legislative terms is a reduction in the amount that a legislator had hoped to spend in the future, not an actual cut to the current budget.
Yeah,
Right?
that's absolutely right. But there's also been promises made for some of the union contracts and the staff. And, one of the proposals that had come from the governor's office was this 1 day a month furlough to save some money out of the increases in the budget. And so if you take a flat budget and you just factor in increases in salary and all those types of things, and you add no new taxes, you're going to have to make cuts somewhere else to programs. And that's what we're starting to see. And I really hope that they look at what they've instigated in the last 3 years with those one-time dollars. They've hired 8,000 employees since the beginning of COVID. And figure out, what do we actually need to do here to run state government? How do we fix our roads? How do we keep bad guys in prison? How do we, keep the police on the streets and the social services to take care of our kids and education and all those types of things, rather than focusing on some of the other things that you see, like $4 million for battery replacements in Seattle?
Yeah, the roads are abysmal, and they've had the decades to figure out the roads, and it is an increasing frustration. But let's set that to the side of the moment for the moment, and go back to the property tax impact. One of the things that we pointed out at WPC, and I've seen it elsewhere, and obviously the opposition in the House and the Senate have pointed it out, is if the proposal as it was put into place, that we could have, in 2023, you could have seen a 20% increase in your property taxes in a single year. I mean, it's an outlier year, but the rest of the years also looked very bad in terms of growing. And then you one of the things that you kept pointing out, Mark, was even though there was a little bit of conversation about how bad it could be, people weren't talking about some of the worst aspects of it, like the banking capacity of, if they don't raise it the full amount, they can bank that capacity and raise it the next time around, or whatever. So this is actually a huge victory for the people of Washington State, for all of you who've made your voice heard, who've shared, because make no mistake, legislators are watching the numbers on social media, on their phone calls, on the letters, on petitions and other things. The people who signed up, what was it, 43,000 people sign up and say, hey, this is a problem for us. The property tax issue, signing up and on the con side. So, this is a very, very big deal. And once again, describe how a special session works and why, when we say this is it's a big win, but we have that caveat that says, on this condition that it doesn't come back in the special session. You got to weigh how stiff the opposition is in those in power to this tax before you can really count it dead.
Yeah, well, when a special session starts, it's called by the governor and enacted by the legislature, obviously, but everything resets. I think you mentioned this at the beginning of our session today. All the bills that we thought were dead are now back on the table again. So it's not great. Now, they could say we're going to form a special session just to address the budget specific issues, but when you start looking at it from that perspective, everything's in the budget. So there's this concept of necessary to pass the budget, while you can pretty much put everything in that bucket at that point. And so special sessions, and the first year I was there in 2015, we had 3 special sessions. We went an additional 3 months. And we weren't required to be there every single day, which, by the way, we are paying a stipend to each of the legislatures that are in session. So it's a significant cost to have a special session. I wasn't required to be there every day, but if I'd been on the budget committees at that time, I would have been there every single day for 6 months. And, I have a job, I have a mortgage to pay, and the legislative salary doesn't cover it because it's designed purposely, and I agree with this, to be a part-time legislature, not a full-time legislature. So, these sessions are like that. So I hope that if they do it, they will focus and use it just for the budget leads to get the budget done. They won't start, and there will be legislators that will come crying with their bills and their spilt milk saying, hey, this bill died in session, can we bring it back, and we need to talk about it, it's super critical that we replace all these batteries in Seattle, otherwise the world's going to fail. And so you'll see that start to happen, and I hope that the legislators are disciplined enough just to focus on that budget.
Let's talk about one of the other things that has happened most recently, and that is the punitive Tesla tax, how else do you phrase it? It's obviously aimed at Tesla, angry at Tesla, and I would submit that that there's no way that this bill would have been submitted or passed if the creator of Tesla weren't such an outspoken person involved in the federal government right now, along with President Trump. So this is one of those weird moments where you have a lot of people who are angry about the possibility of political retribution at the federal level, then passing a law that's about political retribution at the state level. Can you describe this bill for us, Mark, and what happened?
Well, but I think this was obviously I think you just nailed it there. It's a political messaging bill, is what we call them, where the bill specifically was just targeting Elon Musk at the end of the day for this type of thing. And it's not gonna, I mean, it generates a tax. Those cars are very expensive. I mean, the base Model 3 series is over $50,000. On one hand, you've got this punitive tax. On the other hand, you've got all these credits for electric car vehicles. So it's kind of a strange setup that they've done there. I don't know if it'll stand up constitutionally that you go after one specific car or one particular brand. I know there was another bill that was dropped to deal with this specifically and say you can't just punitively tax one specific brand. I mean, where do you go next? But at the end of the day, why are they mad about saving money? And this is, Elon Musk doesn't have any specific power at the federal government. He can make recommendations to the administration, and then they make those specific cuts. I mean, there should be an effort here in Washington State to do exactly the same thing, go through state government. I did a search on the word equity, as you know, and within 20 minutes found $130 million worth of savings if we got rid of a lot of these equity programs that we've got in state government. We're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on this, and yet the current legislature comes back and says, "Oh, we've got this huge budget shortfall." It's ridiculous on one level that they seem to want to penalize this particular group of folks, these Tesla owners, who probably lean a little more to the left, I would assume, on some of these issues, and so they're effectively penalizing the folks that are trying to do the right thing from an environmental perspective. If you don't take into account the total cost of the carbon offset when you build these cars and then have to dispose of them afterwards.
For those of you really interested in the issue, Todd Myers has done a lot of work on that. He's got a write-up online, and there was a Wall Street Journal story, I believe, that also used Todd's work to explore what's happening in Washington State via Tesla. It's basically the political equivalent of a keying of a car, how people are running around, and it's petty and small, and also self-destructive based on the state's own goals for electric car ownership. I mean, without Tesla, those goals are even more wildly out of reach. They already overreach, but Tesla is so dominant in that market that it becomes comical and farcical for them to try to penalize Tesla in any way on that score. So one of the things that happened with the end of with the as currently stands, putting the property tax to death for now, the property tax cap increase, has been talk of changing the way some of the levies would work, Mark, and some have expressed concern about what the impact of that would be. Is there any details that you can share with us on that score and how that's kind of shaking out in the legislature?
No, I don't have anything absolutely right now on this week. We're watching it because everything's still in flux, obviously.
Right.
But as soon as I have something, I will get back to you on it.
I mean, yeah, in a nutshell, some of the concern is that, the legislature was sued, back when you were in the legislature, you're familiar with this under
Mm.
for the McCleary decision, the state had as paramount duty for education. And what would happen under some of these proposals is once again, local levies would start funding primary education for some of the richer districts. And then you'd have inequity among the school districts between poor and rich. And then the state is lining itself up to get sued again, which, by the way, that might be part of the goal, because if you desire to raise taxes and you can point to a court ruling and say, you know what, our hands were tied, we just had to do it, that could be part of it. It's like when you spend one-time dollars for long-term projects, and then you express shock that the money is not there. That's a preset, pre-planned crisis, so to speak, as well.
Yeah, well, one of the issues with the education funding, specifically around McCleary that you've mentioned there, is the state. For those of you not familiar, the state took over a lot of the funding, so they took away local levy capability for the local school districts, leveled the playing field. They got rid of the state salary schedule and did some other bits and pieces there. And now, at the time, I think we were over 50% of the state budget was paying for education. It's now dropped a little because the state budget's gone up so much, so as a percentage, it went down. But it put the school districts in an interesting situation because the state did not remove local bargaining capability for education. And so what has happened since McCleary passed is that the local unions, and you saw this particularly with, for example, the Marysville School District, they went on strike for over a month, I think it was in the end. And they came in and said, hey, we want these big increases. Well, the school district has no levy capability anymore. So when they negotiate and then settle, the only thing they can do is make cuts to local dollars to programs to cover those salary increases, which is what we've seen over the last few years. So the state, in its infinite wisdom, said that, oh no, we're going to cap your budget. We're going to control the dollars you get, but you've still got to negotiate your labor contracts with all the teachers' unions. And, the rank and file teachers are not the bad guys in this situation here. It's the management and the upper level folks in this organization, that it's very top heavy. And now that you've got these school districts trying to balance those two things out. So we're going to hit this again. These school districts are going to go, and they use one-time COVID dollars as well. They really made the situation a lot worse. But they're going to go back to the state at some point. They're going to have to get more money, or they're going to have to. The state's going to have to step in and say, "Hey, no more local bargaining. It should be if we're responsible for that, then under our state constitution, the labor unions, and remember, it is illegal for teachers to go on strike as public employees. They still do it, and they all get their back pay too. So I'd like to see them come in and put some penalties on these folks that are out striking, and they lose the money when they're striking. But then, of course, we had the unemployment benefit bill this year as well, which gives them money for when they're out striking. So you can see where this thing's going, and it's going to end badly, and it's going to end with a McCleary version 2.0.
Yeah, it's bad enough when you have political alliances where, in the private sector, you have management and labor negotiating. They each have their own interests in mind, and that becomes, you've got two people with they might have different parts of leverage, but they each have leverage over one another. They both have the interest in making sure the profits continue. When it's government, and we've got situations like, you have many high up elected officials like former Governor Inslee and others who would express solidarity with striking, which means that those who were striking were negotiating with their own team, which is, it is absurd on its face, and it happens over and over and over again. So that's part of the issue here. Let's talk about business for a moment. You're the center of small business. And one of the things that we were talking about earlier today was the potential increase in the B&O tax and how that's going to shape up for Washington. And Washington is is relatively unique in its tax and the way it's formed. So why don't you describe what's happening with the B&O tax, who's impacted, and what we're likely to see?
Yeah, for folks that don't know what the B&O tax is, it's a tax that's applied to your business gross profits. So you may start a business, maybe a research business, and it's going to build a new product, and you spend $1 million a year, or you bring in $1 million a year, but you're spending maybe $1 million or $2 million as part of that development phase. Well, you're taxed on the gross income at a specific rate. And that rate, when it goes up by even a little amount, is a huge number. And so you may be even making a loss as a business, but the state's going to come in and say, hey, we want, and now they're talking about 2.1% on gross. So if you're a $1 million company, you're going to pay the state $21,000, whether you make money or not. And it's a huge deal. They're talking about a 25% increase in the B&O tax, and it varies based on your business type. Each business is categorized according to a federal code called a NAICS code, NAISC, I think it is, NAICS code, and it says you're a IT business, you're a construction company, you're whatever, a service industry. And so each rate is different. And then on top of that, the state of Washington has tax preferences. And these were introduced by the legislators just to basically take care of the people back home, but also to incentivize different behaviors in the state. Well, they've introduced legislation to automatically expire those, which would be very detrimental to those businesses that rely on those exemptions. So they have a lower taxation rate. As you may know, I own a IT service company, and my rate's now 2.1%. So I've seen about a 500% increase in the amount of tax that I have to pay as a B&O tax over the last 5 or 6 years. It's gone up. It's now a significant amount of money. Now you may say, well, I might be doing quite well on the income side of things, but what am I paying for exactly? This B&O tax, what's it paying for? Because that tax ultimately gets passed on in increased cost in services or products in every company. The companies aren't going to pay it. They're just not going to eat the bottom line away, because otherwise they'll go bankrupt. So that cost gets passed on, and then the consumers see it. What's nasty about B&O tax, though, is it's not in your face as a consumer. It's not like a sales tax where you go, wow, my sales tax is 10.4% in Mill Creek or Linwood. It's a smaller percentage, which then gets tagged on in increased cost of the product. And so the state likes that because they can increase this, plus it's on gross, so it's a very large increase, and it can be sort of hidden from the consumers. You don't know what's going on.
And that's going to be tough. I mean, Washington already struggles with business survival rates. Some are relatively volatile, but we've got a decent track record of having issues in that area that are worth paying attention to, and making it harder for businesses to survive isn't a great plan for this state and for jobs and prosperity. So that's something to watch for there. You've also kept track of a number of smaller taxes and fees and other things. Based on what we're seeing now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing that a great deal of those could be on the table, back on the table, or passed based on a big source of money coming in, and how negotiations are ongoing even this late in the session.
Yeah, and a lot of these were dropped as individual tax increase bills, but there's no way they couldn't be. It's quite probable that they will end up in the budget as a proviso or an appropriation within the budget itself. So they won't run as an individual bill. They'll end up in that big old wad of paper that the legislature puts out at the last minute that it expects you to read and completely comprehend. So you'll see some of these, but in addition to the ones that were dropped earlier this session, 20, 30 additional tax bills, we've just got a little list here. Over the last week or so, we've seen a 100% increase in the tax on beer and wines. The B&O taxes increases that we've talked about. Capital gains on estate tax at 2.9% on everything over $1 million. That's everybody. So if you're lucky enough to own a nice home and your home is appreciated, the state's going to want 2.9% of that when you sell it. There's more tobacco taxes. They're extending sales taxes now to services. Originally, it was just for products. So you go buy your bottle of beer at the store and you're paying your 10%, whatever it is. But now the delivery service that brings it to your door is going to charge you sales tax on that service now as well. And they specifically went after IT services industries on the extension of sales taxes to services. So if you receive services from Microsoft or Amazon or any local IT provider, they're going to tax you sales tax on that as well. That is, for some folks, that's a 10% increase in the cost of the services that you consume. And so they're really going after that. We mentioned the repeal of the tax preferences, and then there's some other fees that they're going to increase taxes on as well, 50 to 100% on some of these fees. I mean, these are massive increases. These are not nickels and dimes, and yet, based on the budget they proposed, they still don't have enough tax revenue to cover the costs. So someone's going to have to sit down and make some hard choices about what they keep in the books and what needs to go away.
Real quick, I want to remind everybody the initiative collection of our collection of signatures on our petition to Governor Ferguson asking for a no new tax budget, urging him to stand strong against the reckless spending in Olympia, the reckless spending he spoke of in his inaugural address. Frankly, his actions over the past week are once again showing that he's willing to listen. He's doing some surprising things and holding, firm on this. So we want to strengthen that position and make sure we get our signatures in later this week. If we're close to a new threshold, if you would take that initiative link, send it out. It's right at our homepage, right at the very, very top of the page. You can take that link and send it out to friends, family, and others. Tell them to sign on. The petition will get those signatures delivered toward the end of this week, and I'm very hopeful that we can, deliver, an added bonus to the governor. And frankly, we're thankful for his stances so far. Stance first on the wealth tax and now on the property tax, which is good news. Mark, real quick, you mentioned earlier that the Republicans had submitted a no new tax budget, and part of this, it's a strange thing because people hear that and they think, okay, minority party, they're so small, they don't really have the power to push things. Well, that might be true, but they do highlight the possibility of doing it. And it's interesting that there's no requirement that that both parties submit a no new tax budget. Both parties don't submit a budget that would just be balanced based on the amount of money projected to come in. Do you think that would be possible with, the priorities? I mean, obviously both parties are going to have different priorities and different values expressed maybe, but would it be possible for the other side, the majority side, to submit such a budget?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you could even just take the budget they passed 2 years ago and pass the same budget. I mean, they would have to make some minor cuts here and there, but immediately none of the increases that they're asking for would go through, obviously. So it's absolutely possible. And, I've said this multiple times, but in 2018, when I left the legislature, the budget was about a 42 billion for a 2-year budget cycle. The proposals we've seen have it at 78 billion now, 80 billion. So what are we spending all this money on? Where did all, this 38 billion over the last 5 years, 8 years, where is this money going? Because that's almost 100% increase in the cost of running the government. And yet I don't see 100% more services being offered. I don't see 100% improvement in any of the services. In fact, what I see is, our roads not getting fixed. There's any estimates around 7 billion to fix all the potholes and the back maintenance on our road system. Our bridges are crumbling. You've got all these changes that they're doing with the paid family leave, which is just increases in taxes. It's more and more because that fund's completely underfunded because they structured the whole thing incorrectly and they shouldn't have done it in the first place. But when the state government's coming in here and paying for this type of stuff, so what do we actually get? And so absolutely they could cut it.
Let me just interject there and add a little bit to the paid family leave bill, because Elizabeth Hovde, our workers' rights researcher and healthcare director, has written about that. And one of the things she's pointed out is, I don't know if the proposal's passed or not. I'd have to ask Elizabeth, but that's a tax that started at what, 0.5%, or maybe it was even less than that. I can't remember, but it doubled in the first, the first 2 years. And now, it's there's proposals to have it increase, all the way to 2%. And if you start adding up some of these payroll taxes that are proposed, and keep in mind there's others that are being talked about proposed, it becomes a de facto income tax where you could find yourself having 10% deducted from your paycheck before you ever cash it, just from new payroll taxes. And how that's not an income tax is beyond me at a certain point, right?
Yeah, they keep on adding more load to that fund. Excuse me.
Yeah, and other programs as well in
Right.
terms of the paid medical leave or paid family leave, and then the Long-Term Care Act and other things.
Yeah, and the fund is coming out of the Employment Security Fund, which is used for unemployment benefits, which was depleted from 5 billion down to almost bankruptcy during the pandemic. And we called out the governor's office on that. In fact, they called me on a Saturday and told me to take the blog down because it would incite panic, that I'd found out, actually done some very simple math, that they were going to run out of money. The blog was not inaccurate, but
Didn't they replenish a Nigerian princess fund there? Or was that a different scandal I'm thinking of?
no, it was the same scam. So they lost a significant amount of money through that. So any government employees that are listening, and don't click on links in email where it says I have a Nigerian prince that wants to meet you. I joke, but that was our tax dollars that went out to fraud. So that's really bad. But they're using this fund now. Even the bill they ran this year for giving free money to striking workers who are striking through choice, not through, which is the unemployment fund, supposed to be through, you ran into hard times. They keep adding more and more on the paid family leave and all this type of stuff to this fund. They're going to have to come back and add more to it at some point, because it's going to run out of money, which is what Elizabeth has been talking about for the last while here. So, the small business owners, you're going to start seeing them move their businesses out of the state if the state doesn't stop this. A lot of the stuff that came through this year originally, like the wealth tax, would have hit, the Microsoft employees and the Amazon employees who get paid partially in stock grants. Sure, they're making some really good money, but there's no reason to keep them here. We just saw Amazon migrate a bunch of its employees out of Seattle, and now Seattle's facing a $47 million shortfall in its budget because it had assumed this money was going to come in, and Amazon said, "Oh, we're just going to move them all to Bellevue," and if the state does the same thing, the companies in this state, the big boys in the state, like the Amazons, the Boeings, they're more restricted because of their manufacturing plants. But the Microsofts and those service types industries can easily move their employee base to another state that's much more friendly to running their businesses. And in some cases, small businesses will be forced to move because those margins are getting so tight. They're increasing the B&O tax and then property taxes and all these types of things that they're talking about. Eventually, they will say, "That's it. I'm done. I'm out. I'm going to go register myself in a different state. I can work remote because I'm a service industry." And the state then gets 0 tax dollars instead of a reduced amount.
Mark, I want to thank you again for coming on Washington Policy on the Go and giving us a legislative update on with a tax picture here in Washington State. And I'll emphasize again. Well, I'll let you emphasize. You tell people whether or not it could change big in the next few days or weeks or not. The whole picture could be wildly different. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're going to see some really interesting proposals, I think, and then they've still got to be negotiated through a process called concurrence once they do that. So I just don't think they're going to get the budget out. You might see some proposals, but I suspect at this point they're focused on making sure that the legislation that they want, like the rent control stuff, gets all the way to the governor's desk.
Yeah, this is going to be you expect your tax dollars to pay for a few more per diems, before this is all over. Or maybe, maybe miracles have happened. Maybe they'll be able to get it all done by the 27th. But I wouldn't be surprised if Washington Policy on the Go continues every Tuesday for some time to come.
Yeah.
Yes. Mark, thank you. And thanks to all of you who are
Yeah.
watching. I want to remind you that I want to thank you again for signing the petition to Governor Ferguson. I urge you to share it with your social media, share it with your friends, neighbors, email it out so we can get as many of those signatures in as possible before we turn them in a couple of days. So please do that. And thank you for watching. We'll be back next Tuesday with Washington Policy on the Go.
If you found this informative, share it with a friend and consider checking out one of our suggested videos over here. Make sure you're subscribed so that you can stay up to date with the latest policy news from Washington.